There really is nothing colder than a carbon fiber tripod on a cold night. It doesn't matter how big your gloves are. Your hands are going to get cold because it just conducts heat like nobody's business. Yesterday's weather was frankly abysmal. Sorry, not yesterday, this morning's. Starting about midnight, we had about a equal part mix of rain, sleet, and snow. And the slushy wet snow, not the good snow. Anyways, broke about noon. And it is clear, clear, clear. I doubt the cell phone will see it, but it's almost noon, almost full moon. Coming into full moon. Moon rises about 10:30. The nice thing is the sun sets at like 4 o'clock right now. So what I've got here is the 810 28 f1.4 and a pure night filter, which is a filter designed to block man-made light. And you can see how much light there is right there. There's Temecula down there, I'm pretty sure. The catch with this ridge is we're facing pretty much west, which means LA is down there. And Temecula, which is not small cities right there, and it's pretty much part of LA. So, and we've got all the sea haze, even though we're up at pretty high elevation. So the ground is pretty atrocious. I'm going to be using a really simple method of doing this. It's something I teach in my Star Trail classes. I actually call it the dumb method. I plug a wired remote in, and I put the camera on continuous high mode, which is usually thought of as sports, right? You hold the button down, it goes click, 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 click. Takes a lot of pictures in a row. But I've got the camera set on manual 30 seconds. So what's happening is when I lock the button down on the remote, it'll sit here and take 30-second exposures as quick as it possibly can, which means there won't be much of a gap. So we're just gonna do that and see how it goes. I think my composition I'm pretty happy with. Reasonable histogram. If you're following along, I'm shooting 30-second exposures. 1600 f4 right now, which it's pretty bright out here, so you know, it is what it is. It's actually pretty dark above me, but the problem is LA is just to the west, so let's see what this does. So the trick now is we get to wait, but with the numb method, one of the catches, at least on Nikon, is there's a built-in shutter limit. It'll only take so many pictures for one press of the shutter button. And this camera, it's around 100 frames. And the reason that's programmed in is because Nikon doesn't want you to put your camera in the bag on continuous high on accident and blow the shutter up, taking 1,000,000 pictures. It's really easy to get around. All you do is release the shutter button and relock it once every, you know, short of those frames. So at 30-second frames once every 45 minutes or so. We talked about lock and unlock, right? So we just heard the click clack. That's all you got to do. I locked it and unlocked it. So now I've got a fresh 100 frames or 120 or whatever your frame count is. If you're the kind of person who wants to just abandon your camera, which I do on a regular basis, this won't work. You get a more complicated intervalometer, which I have. Tonight I'm maxed 2 hours because the moon is coming up. So I'll probably stand here an hour and then book it out. So it doesn't bother me that I got to touch the camera every once in a while. So I'm back in the truck. Just a quick word on composition. Normally Star Trails people kind of think you want to point at the point of rotation in the sky, which in the Northern Hemisphere means north. I actually really like east-west Star Trails, and this is facing due west. I'm basically facing directly into the South LA. So we got quite a bit of light pollution, but we're at 5,500 feet, which means we're trapping a lot of that light pollution below us. And the air up here is super dry, despite the fact that it snowed and sleeted and rained all morning. The humidity just kind of fell completely out of the air about 2 o'clock. It got really dry. My skin feels like parchment paper, so usually cold, dry air, good viewing conditions for the sky. I'm gonna let this go maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. I'm shooting 28 millimeters, which has about a 75-degree field of view. Don't quote me on that, but it's around there. It's not as wide as my 14. And with the 14, you need a very long interval to get much apparent motion in your frame because the stars move a certain number of degrees per minute, half a degree, a quarter of a degree a minute, I believe. If your field of view is 110 degrees like the 14, you can do the math. Every minute they move this many pixels. With the 28, they move more pixels because you're looking at a smaller slice of sky. So 2 hours that'll give me a good star trail. Rookie mistake. When I looked at the moonrise time, it was 20:30. I thought, oh, 10:30. No, 8:30. So we got about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour in, and then the moon came up. There it is back there behind me. One thing I noticed is I pulled the camera, so I've got a little bit of frost in the front of there, and I could have probably dealt with that if I had anticipated it. Since it was spur of the moment, who knows? We'll see if it works out when I get back. It looked okay on the back of the screen. The real question is what it looks like when I pull it up on a full-size monitor and look at it. That may have formed in the last 10 minutes, or it may have formed 2 minutes into the star trail. It's hard to say without shining a light into the front of the lens to see if there's fog on it. So anyways, I'm going to pack up and get back to camp. I'm back home now. It's actually March. I let this star trail sit for a while because honestly I thought the fog over it and it was short, and I thought, nah, it's not going to be worth it. Just shows why you should always pull up your photos and look through them. I've got the photos imported here. I've put them in a collection in Capture One just so they're easy to get. There's 174 frames, including my test frames at the beginning. So I'm just going to go right to the top. So before I put in the pure night filter, you can see how orange it is. And of course my white balance, I could have adjusted that with white balance. So if I set that to incandescent, it kind of balances that out. Go to the pure night, but you can also see the stars have a little better contrast, as does the city down below with the pure night filter. So I'm just going to flick through, and you can see I kind of got the composition settled. I was up, I panned down a little bit. So my first frame is this third frame, and I always like to kind of scroll down all the way down to the bottom and look at the last couple of frames. And you can see here, if I scroll back, kind of make a little video, you can see the shadows, see the moon come up right there. So it wasn't too early in my star trail, and it actually doesn't really wash the sky out too badly. There's so much light pollution here because of LA, it doesn't really make that much difference until it's actually fully up. So that actually might be kind of nice because it lit the foreground for me. Gave me some texture in the hills instead of the hills just being, you know, this black silhouette like they are. So what I like to do is I like to pick an image. I like to process it. And in Capture One, I use a pretty straightforward method, at least the foundation. I use auto adjust, and I auto adjust my exposure, and I auto adjust my levels to get a black point and a white point. And that's Command L, and you can set those in the adjustment menu. Under the auto adjust menu, configure auto adjust, there is all the things you can auto adjust. Now I'm going to go ahead and recover the highlights in this because I don't want the city to be blown out. You can watch no highlight recovery, 100% highlight recovery. It actually does a pretty good job. I could also do a local adjustment there and bring the exposure up, but then it tends to be kind of hard to blend those two together. I'm also going to bump the exposure of the entire image up a little bit. And I'm going to clip the blacks just to drop my sky. And this mountain can be full black. I don't care. It's going to end up filling in from the moonrise instead of these photos. So I don't need to try to recover those shadows. And then I often like my midpoint not at 0. I like it a little bit to the right, which pushes more of my histogram to the left on these type of photos. So there's that photo adjusted. Super easy. Haven't done much. I don't do any clarity because that's a form of sharpening, and sharpening will make the star trail not come together well. You get edges between the segments of the stars. I don't do any sharpening at this point. I'm going to go ahead and do a Command-Shift-C, which copies the adjustments you've made. I'm going to Command-A to select all 774 photos, and I'm going to hit Command-Shift-V. And now it has applied it to all the photos. And again, I like to jump all the way to the end and check those out. And you can see how much less black there is, right? We've got these hills here. You can also see that the sky is starting to get some noise in it. And so it may be that we don't want to use these final frames so the sky is washing out. And I can try to adjust them and make them match a little better, and I can do a local adjustment. But what I like to do before I spend much time doing any of that is I'll do a quick export. Actually, just going to go over here and I'm going to rename this because I already exported this once. I'm just going to rename this Part 2. And I'm just going to go ahead and export these frames. I'm just going to unselect these first two because they're garbage. So coming to my process tab, I've got a recipe called Photo Working, which is exports 100% quality JPEG, Adobe RBG. I have zero issues with JPEG. I know a lot of people get all upset about that. More power to you. But 100% JPEG, not going to have any artifacts. And I'm also stacking, which is going to be a form of noise reduction, and smoothing anyways. Don't worry about it. You don't need TIFF. You don't need PSD for this. Probably don't even need 100%, but that's what I do because I use this for retouching scan and pictures for print and such. This recipe exports to my photo working directory, which is kind of my scratch area for doing retouching, and it exports the images into a folder named for the catalog. I use project-based catalog, so that'll be 2018-12-23 Idlewild Camping, and then the collection name. And the collection name in this case is Star Trail 1 Mark II. The only other thing you want to check is the output name. I like to leave these names for the image name. The image name being just the file name as it came in. So got the 172 and 174 selected, click process, and then wait. Okay, so we just finished the export. Takes a little while. Bring open that folder in Finder, Star Trail 1 Mark II. And I can flip these, but that's not really that exciting. What I want to do now is I want to go to StarStax. And I'm just going to select all of these and I'm going to drop them onto StarStax. Now, when I use StarStax, my final assembly is going to be in gap filling, but that takes extra time. So I'm just going to do light and only. And what that does is it puts every frame on top of the previous frame. It only puts the pixels that are brighter than the frame underneath. So then the first thing I almost always do is just throw the frames in and process it. And right off the bat, you can see there's a gap here between that first frame and the next frame. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop. And I'm going to turn the first frame off, and then I'm going to start over again. And the reason that gap was there is because I had probably took a test frame and then waited a second before I started the real Star Trail. And it kind of looks like these are chunky, but that's really just aliasing. StarStax doesn't use very advanced scaling. So if you look at the heavier Star Trails, they're much more solid. And as I talked about, this is an east-west Star Trail. I'm actually facing west. And it's not a very wide lens. 28's a wide lens, but it's not like my 14 that sees 100 and I think it sees almost 108 degrees horizontally. So I'm getting a little bit of the curl on the edges towards the poles, but not much. It's mostly straight lines, which I kind of like. I'm also facing LA, so there's a lot of aircraft traffic, and I'm probably gonna have to deal with that in a different way because a lot of it's flying towards the west. So there's a trail right here, which will be almost impossible to take out with it assembled. So I'll probably go find the frames that one's in and take it out. And while I'm doing that, I'll probably take out the rest of these. But this is why I assemble it. We have a few clouds down here, and the clouds are going to smear in, and they may wash out our lower city. That's okay. We may actually bring in the city by itself in one frame. We may not. As this runs, I'm just watching for things to come in. We've got some clouds coming in, and those came in around 980. I might choose to take those out. Now we've got some clouds coming in here right at the very center. The ones down on the horizon don't bother me, but these here at the end do. So if I click on the individual images, I can see those images. You can see this cloud develop frame to frame. And the real issue here is that it's bright because of the light pollution in the moon, and it's right in the center of the frame. I don't mind the ones on the horizon. So I'm just gonna turn these last few frames off. It won't really hurt our star trail much. If I wanted to keep those frames but remove the clouds, what I would do is just go into Affinity and black out the clouds so that they were darker than the sky and the rest of the star trail, and then they just wouldn't show up at all. Before I stack this again, I know I don't really can't really accomplish much with the airplane. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open all this in preview. The patented wrong monitor algorithm that Apple uses. And I'm just going to flip through these. If we look, these first 3 frames have a plane. It starts off down here, comes up and goes straight across, basically parallel to the stars. So I'm going to just drop those into Affinity. Take a second to start here. And I'm just going to drop all the frames that have that issue in here. Okay, so we've got 4 frames loaded. Now, there's a couple of ways we can deal with this. This part really isn't that bad. One way I can deal with that is I can use the inpainting tool. And it's mostly just going to fill in the background sky. Save that. No reason to save it as anything other than a JPEG. And close it. Go to the next one. Now, this one has a couple of planes. Got one down here and over here. I'm going to use a slightly different strategy. You can use either one of these. They work the same. There's a little bit of an actual star right here. So if I were to use inpainting, let me just go over it with inpainting. Inpainting is going to take that star out, and we're going to take that star out either way, right? It just leaves basically background sky. Another way to deal with it is to take your brush, make it 100% opaque, and you can make it hard or you can make it soft. I'm going to make it like 30% hard. I'm going to go small. And all I have to do is black out the part that I want gone. And I can get really precise with this, and I can leave this star here, mostly, so there's not a break in that particular trail because it's a fairly bright star. And what I've done by putting black is, when I do the blending, I'm putting only the lighter pixels, so black doesn't show up. It basically says, hey, don't show this. And on something like this, it's not really necessary. I could have done inpainting. But there are times when being able to just black out, for example, those clouds in the last ones. I guess I'll show you that anyways. And what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of sneaking up on that wigwag light. And sometimes there's a reason to be really precise. In this case, it doesn't really matter because there's just basically sky, which is noise. And the stacking is going to essentially remove that because that noise is random. So one frame it'll be a little brighter, the next frame that pixel will be a little darker, and the light noise is going to bring it all up to the lightest level, which is why the star trail stack tends to get a little brighter than the underlying frame, so you want to drop it back down a little bit. Okay, so you can see I did just an ugly job there, but there's no other plane trails in here, so save that. Again, this one, I'll just use the paintbrush. You can decide how fussy you want to be with the stars that it crosses. Quite often, it's the red, blinking red and green lights, what they call the wigwag lights, which help other pilots and observers tell what direction the plane is flying. Those are what's the most objectionable because they're blinking, and so you get a dashed line. But any kind of path that doesn't flow with the stars in the sky will break the star trail up. So I normally just take those out. one disadvantage to using the in-paint brush or something like this is sometimes it'll see a nearby star and it'll add it back in, or it'll add an extra star because I think that's part of the texture you're trying to replace, and you will get little tiny segments of star that aren't really where they're supposed to be and may not even be parallel to the other stars. So a lot of times I'll use this black paintbrush method, just because it's a little bit less likely to cause issues. The most likely problem is you'll have a break in the star trails if you paint over one. And that doesn't necessarily bother me unless it's a super obvious star. Then you might need to be a little more careful about how you take out around it. And again, you can just paint right up to the edge of it, and it won't really cause any problems, because that background sky and stuff will come back in later on. Okay, so now rather than go through and do all these, I'll do that in a minute and time lapse it, but rather than do all those, I'm just going to go here and I'm just going to reprocess it, and you can watch that black goes away because later frames of light. Now you can also see this star trail right here, which is around 35, is going to be an issue. So because I'm facing a major metropolitan area with a major airport, LAX, not to mention a couple small airports, I'm going to have to spend quite a bit of time going through and just kind of taking these out one by one. And in this case, because they're flying east to west, kind of parallel to the stars, that's the way to do it. I'm not going to wait till the star trail's finished. So I don't need to let this finish. So cue up the montage. And sometimes in a situation like this, I'll just open everything. Incredibly tedious, but also effective. Sometimes it's the least boring way to handle this type of situation. Okay, if that looked incredibly tedious, it was. And I was also being pretty rough and tumble with it. The thing with the blackout is you're just hiding stuff, and you have all these frames you're stacking up. So a lot of times you won't notice it. And I wasn't as consistent as I probably should have been, but I also will say I don't necessarily know. It's hard to judge from my eyes what's brighter and darker if you have different colors. So a lot of times I'll black something out if I think it might be a little brighter than the background, even if it isn't. So all we're going to do is we're going to run it again, and we're going to wait. We're going to see what it looks like. You'll see the black. That first frame had black in it, and it went away immediately. And the city is actually helping us out here with the clouds, because the clouds would normally be really bright, but the city is brighter than the haze over them. So as the little low clouds kind of move, the city fills back in. You can see here I've missed a few aircraft down here in the low part. And I'll decide whether I want to go back to the frames and take those out, or whether I want to just do it in the completed image. Honestly, these ones down here in the trees, I'm probably going to go back to the individual frames, because pulling them out of these trees without breaking the trees up once it's finished is really hard. But I can literally just go into the underlying frames and just black out in those frames, and it won't matter. And thus far, I've done a pretty good job on the top of the sky. You can see there's no planes coming in there. And even though this wasn't a very long star trail, because it's a narrower field of view, the stars kind of move quicker. They seem to move quicker, especially pointing at the plane of the equator. They have to go 360 degrees, but 360 degrees for them is from horizon to horizon back around again, as opposed to around the pole, which is a little tiny circle. So by shooting east-west, you get a really big apparent motion in the stars, which lets you fill the frame really quickly. I wanted this to be a longer star trail. It only ended up being about an hour and 15 minutes. And it still looks really good because the apparent motion is so high near the equator. Okay. So at the end of that star trail, I noticed that there was a little bit of fog on the front filter, and you'll notice how this bottom area is kind of washed out, and that's partially because I'm photographing under really bright lights, getting a little bit of flare, but also that front filter was not completely clear. But I can come back in here once we're done with this, and I can use a little bit of clarity, a little bit of structure to bring back the local contrast and reduce that hazing. I do think I'm going to go in and I'm not going to worry about these. These are easy to take out. I am going to worry about the planes that are over here in the tree. So I'm going to make one more round through the files. Probably not through all the files. I'll probably look through them. This plane right here will be pretty easy. I missed it. I think I want to do one more round. What do you want to bet? That's the outlet from LAX right there. That little that's where most of the planes flying east come out of LAX. Okay, so I just need to take out all these kind of little short plane trays down here near the horizon, and then come back in, do another light and only round to make sure I've got everything, and then finally I'll do the gap filling blending, and then hopefully it's 99% done. Then I just do a little bit of retouching in Affinity, or maybe just in Capture One, just a little curve adjust, that type of thing. So here we go, one more round. Okay, hopefully that's my last pass through the individual images. We'll run the stack one more time and see how it goes. Okay. So it looks like I got most of it. There are a few planes I clearly missed. I thought maybe that was a car, but I don't think it is. I think that's a plane landing on an airport down here. I missed some down here. And I missed a couple right here. And I'll have to... I think I may just take this one out after the fact, because I don't feel like going through all the images to find it. So now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the gap filling version. And I'll clean up the airplanes down here once we're done. And this will be a much slower stack than the light and only. Now that it's done stacking it, we're going to save it. And I normally name this the name of the first file. .stacked. .jpeg. It'll handle the JPEG. There, open that in Affinity. And so now we'll take care of just a few last cleanup tasks, stuff I missed going through the files. This is all pretty straightforward. So there's more cleanup I could do here, but instead of doing it here in Affinity, I'm actually going to drop back into Capture One. I'm just going to bring this into this collection. And if you look at the histogram of this, you'll notice that there's not much black. Part of it is because we only lighten things and the moon came up, but also just in general, noise is random. So you'll have some black pixels, some white pixels, some very dark pixels in the dark areas, which means you're going to the lighter pixels. And so everything, the sky background, etc., all tends to get lighter as time goes on. So we're going to go ahead and take a black point back in, and then I think what I want to do here is I want to do a little local adjustment, and I'm going to create I'm going to create another layer, copy mask from sky, and then I'm going to invert the mask. So that just is a perfect opposite of the sky mask. And one thing we've got going on here is we've got this haze. And so what I'm probably going to have to do with that actually is do a little bit more of a local adjustment just on the area that's got it. So we're going to increase the clarity in the structure, turn our opacity and flow way down, turn the mask on, turn that off. I'm also going to increase the contrast and drop the exposure. Now, one thing about this pure night filter is it tends to make your white balance a little bit strange away from the sky. I feel like it does a pretty good job on the sky, but especially on skin tones, which we don't have in this photo, but even this green down here can get a little bit strange. But I think I'm just about happy with that. So anyways, there's from walking around in the cold all the way through assembled, a little bit of final tweaking, finished Star Trail from out in Idlewild to the east of LA out here in California. Talk to y'all later.